Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose you're wondering why I am very dressed up today. And no, we're not going back to Helldive News. Few of you will get that reference. But no, I spent far too much time on this project to not make it a big deal. You remember back to my ENA video, which has gotten a surprising amount of views that I am very shocked by and very thankful for. But when we watched the show and did the reaction video on it, I couldn't help but continue to see strange things that started to actually connect somewhat. Somehow, in the random absurdity that is ENA, things started to go together. So therefore, this is part 1 of 3 in my lore video series on ENA. So I hope that you will enjoy it as much as you did my last theory video, which you should definitely check out after this. And speaking of checking other things out, if you've never once played ENA Dream Barbecue and never once seen the ENA show and have no idea what either of those are, go watch the show and play the game right now. The game's free on Steam and the show is on YouTube. Both links are in the description. Go check on those right now because it's confusing enough as is. At least have a concept of how confusing it is before we get into it. And one more thing. You'll find also in the description is a PDF link to my script for this video. It contains all the references and things that I used to make this project. So peruse as much as you wish. So now without further ado, let's get into the video. In order to start this theory, we first need to figure out who the main character, ENA, actually is. Here's what I've discovered. She's an English-speaking female with a parental history in Mali. That is, that's explained later. Likely her father is from America due to her accent. She grew up in Peru due to her parents' work as international stockbrokers. This is supported by ENA wearing a Peruvian schoolgirl outfit throughout the series and the game. Her real name is unknown. This is one of the few unanswered questions I have, at least about the show. Now, ENA was a problem child and frequented drug and alcohol use. She was forced by her parents, seeing this act of defiance, into a PMC called Defiant International, thinking that military training would get her to behave. Now, really what her parents didn't know is that ENA had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, causing her to act out against her will. However, regardless, she was put through military training, and after training, she was applied to work for Triple Canopy, which was one of Defiant International's biggest buyers. However, Triple Canopy was merged with Blackwater, an American PMC, to form Constellus in 2015. And so therefore, ENA joined Constellus. And in 2020, she went to assist with the war in Donbas, Ukraine, confidentially. What exactly is the war in Donbas, Ukraine? Well, for that, I'm gonna have to explain the Cold War again.
If I had a nickel every time I had to summarize the Cold War for a theory video, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Anyways, super long story short, Russia had claims in Europe after World War II. NATO also had claims in Europe after World War II. And Russia and NATO had differences, and then NATO started putting nuclear launch sites closer and closer to Russia. Russia didn't like that, and one thing led to another, and eventually Russia ended up invading Ukraine to try and claim it back, because Ukraine was claiming to join NATO. And before the giant invasion in 2022, the war in Donbas, an area in Ukraine, began. It started in 2014 and continued until the main Russian invasion in 2022. ENA was likely deployed onto the front line sometime around 2020. She was primarily deployed in Yenikhiv. This was one of the centers of conflict during the war in Donbass, and also where her name comes from. For if you see, right there in the name is ENA. Now, she served until the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, when Russian PMCs attacked her unit. ENA's unit suffered devastating losses, yet she escaped with her life. She then developed PTSD on top of her bipolar disorder to experience frequent manic episodes. And this, of course, caused her to relapse back into drugs and alcohol to escape her flashbacks and her manic episodes. Now, there have been multiple confirmed reports of soldiers using drugs on the front line in Ukraine, so she likely obtained these drugs and started using them again while still on deployment. The events of the YouTube series and the video game are narcotic-induced dreams, with most of the show taking place in Ukraine and the game taking place back home in Peru. She stays in Ukraine until 2025 when the events of Dream Barbecue occur. Now, if none of this makes sense, well, it will in a bit. Just let me explain how I came to all of these conclusions, by starting with the show.
Auction day. These are the utmost grand of days. This is going to be so...
Now, this is very simply just a video of ENA, quote-unquote, dancing. But there is important context to learn here. Firstly, we see that ENA was created by a Peruvian animator named Joel G, or Joel Gaera. ENA is also inspired by a Picasso painting titled A Girl Before a Mirror, which is very similar to ENA's character design. She has two colors, at least of her skin, which is blue and yellow, which is the Ukrainian flag, emphasizing how I was able to come to the conclusion about Ukraine. Now, the strange dance that ENA does during the episode is likely a symbolization of her detachment from reality due to her manic episodes, which is a common symptom of people with bipolar 1 disorder. Now, you notice here that she's wearing different clothes than that you see in the rest of the show. This likely symbolizes ENA before she joined the military. Now, granted, she still suffered from bipolar disorder and still had a lot of problems with addiction and whatnot, but at least she seems like she might be actually happy in some degree. But then she was forced into military service, which changed everything. And that is when we get into the second episode of the series, and that is ENA Auction Day. Now, this episode starts out with ENA and a new character named Mooney. Now, ENA and Mooney are looking for a place to sit during an auction that's going on. But now, who is this strange Mooney character? There appears to be a half-moon figure with a cubic object sticking out of her. This object likely represents the type of physical control Mooney has over ENA, which in this particular instance represents her default control she has. Now, what do I mean by control? Well, I'm saying that Mooney represents the version of ENA that takes over during a manic episode. This is the bipolar side of ENA. Mooney encourages ENA to embrace her addictions and allow her to take control. ENA occasionally, throughout the series, notices that Mooney acts strangely.
If you get what I'm saying.
Wait. No. That was very weird.
This is because ENA sometimes see-throughs Mooney's trickery to grasp what she truly is. Now, you can see on Mooney that she has black hair, just like ENA, emphasizing my point. And they appear to be friends. Now, why is ENA friends with her manic side? It probably has something to do with the Stockholm Syndrome. Being held hostage by this inescapable part of her, I guess they became friends after a while. Now we can see that ENA has a male and a female side.
These are the utmost grand of days. This is going to be so...
Awful. I think this is going to be the worst day of my life.
The male side appears to be the rational, courteous, and patient side of ENA. He also seems to be in control for most of the time. This likely represents the fake persona ENA attempts to maintain in front of other people. Now, the male side likely represents the side of ENA that she wishes to be in real life yet can never truly obtain, a sane, put-together, happy individual. Yet this unobtainable, perfect self-image is tearing ENA up inside and is actually fueling her own problems. And this brings us to the other side of ENA, and that is the blue side, a female side, which is depressive, suicidal, and prone to outbursts. This represents the real ENA, unable to control her addictions and prone to manic or depressive episodes, which is characteristic of being bipolar. She is also constantly self-deprecating and insists that she is worthless. Now we move on to when the auction actually begins. The auctioneer appears to be some sort of puppet fed by a tube connected to a videotape. This likely symbolizes ENA using physical objects, such as household amenities and things like that, to drown out her personal issues. It also includes indulging in sweets and other indulgent foods, like the chocolate currency that is used for the auction. The fact that he is a puppet fed by a videotape likely symbolizes the soullessness that million-dollar corporations exhibit when engaging with consumers. But that, my friends, is a topic for another day. He also states that all your existential troubles will go away soon, likely representing the reasons behind ENA purchasing unnecessary things. Now, the item on sale that is in question is a dog in an hourglass. Now, what this is the creator of the show being meta by featuring his dog, because the model for the dog is actually modeled after Joel Gaera's dog. It also represents materialism. Now, just keep in mind that whenever this dog appears, it has no further meaning than to just have Joel Gaera make a cameo in one of his videos. There is no incredible lore significance, it is just a dog. Now, the auction goers who are bidding on the hourglass dog are what appears to be strange talking tombstones. And they appear to have gems with mouths and hands on them, and bet using chocolate currency. Now, these likely represent ENA's manic episodes individually, in which she makes these unnecessary purchases. The gems on these tombstones represents how ENA wastes her money, and the hands and mouth show her physical desire for items and indulgent foods. Now, what happens next is strange. All the auction goers get crushed by rain rocks. Now, what are these exactly? There's some strange pixelated floating half-cube face thing that drops these rain rocks and crushes the members of the auction and ending it. Now, what this represents is ENA waking up from one of her manic spending episodes and realizing what she has done and trying to undo it. Now, whenever you see these rain rocks, know that this represents the consequences that ENA has to face after getting out of a manic episode. The episode ends with ENA vomiting static on the ground, and then Mooney criticizes her. Now, it's interesting that Mooney criticizes ENA for doing this and also does not seem to care for ENA's emotional breakdowns. Now, ENA vomiting static represents when she wakes up from a manic episode. Emphasis on the rain rocks falling right as she does this. The whole episode of Auction Day is to show how ENA wakes up from her manic episodes and also some of the things she does in them. That is the purpose of this episode. And now we move on to the next. Extinction Party.
Salutations, sir. May I please enter? I have some urgent information to communicate to my pal Moon.
Now, this episode is certainly very interesting. There are a lot of characters in this one, and there is a lot to cover, so let's get into it. It starts out with ENA requesting to enter somewhere because she desperately needs to speak with Mooney. Now, the guard at this door is certainly interesting. It appears to be a Michelangelo head statue on top of some sort of centaur body. This can actually be pretty easily explained, and it'll make more sense as my episode's explanation goes on. This likely represents the bodyguard to whatever place ENA is trying to go to. Now, the place that ENA is going to for today's episode is where she receives her narcotics. This statue person is the bodyguard, and notices that ENA does not look like the typical patrons of the drug den that he is guarding, hence why he initially prevents ENA from entering. However, he eventually determines that ENA is not a threat and lets her through. What's interesting to note here is ENA uses the word imperch, which is certainly an interesting word.
Very, and much imperch.
It is actually a word that is no longer used and hasn't been used since the 1700s, and it means of utmost importance. Is this important? Not really. Is it interesting? Sure is. Just like this next thing. This thing in the background. That appears to be some sort of game console. It likely represents that ENA played video games in some amount. Is it relevant to the overall lore? No. Is it interesting? Yes. Now, ENA goes through some sort of mouth blue door thing to enter this, what is confirmed to be the drug den. Now, what does this mean? This likely represents the mouth of the beast that ENA goes through with drug and alcohol abuse. This is likely her gateway into possibly buying drugs for the first time since she was in military training. Now, doors in this series are represented as blue. Now, this likely means that there is a blue door that ENA goes through to take her narcotics, likely a bathroom. Sound familiar? Anyways, once inside the building, ENA enters what appears to be a maze. This likely represents just the general maze of ENA's life, filled with uncertainties and hazards like the green gas, and the only path forward is deeper into her own insanity. The first character we encounter in this maze area is a strange puppet mime thing. This strange puppet mime thing has talking hands, and she appears to know ENA. Her name is also Merci. Now, I think the translation for this character is Japanese, but whatever it is, it's not accurate. The real character, not what her hands are saying, are telling ENA to stay away and not accept anything from these people. However, her hands are encouraging ENA to go forward. Since this person is being controlled against her will to guide ENA to Mooney, which is explained to be ENA's manic self, this person is likely a friend of ENA who is also addicted to narcotics. The narcotics keep her from acting how she wants to. After ENA speaks with this person, she goes through a portal, which likely represents ENA's continual decision to take drugs. Now, then she enters a room with a lot of strange things in it. There's certainly a lot to unpack here. Everyone in this room is likely to be other drug users / dealers in some sort of drug house. Now, those guard-like things we see on the wall over there are probably cartel members acting as security for the place. This means that ENA has gone, unfortunately, quite deep into her addictions and drug usage. The next character we meet is some sort of karate guy, which likely represents some form of a karate instructor who tries in vain to warn ENA of the dangers of drug use. Now, the whole episode of Extinction Party, as I mentioned before, is likely ENA's reintroduction to drugs to cope with PTSD. The title, Extinction Party, represents the extinction of ENA's sanity and innocence. The UFO that this karate guy has likely means he was a foreigner to Ukraine, and remember, that's where this is all taking place, and that he is possibly trapped from returning home after the war. His Japanese translation also does not match up, but in both translations he tells ENA to stay away. Yet ENA does not. He also says that with an untrained mind like ENA's, that she could die. This likely is warning her about the dangers of continuing with these addictions. Yet, in response, ENA, her sad side, says good, again contributing to her suicidal nature. After this, ENA goes down a tunnel with a purple hand beckoning her forward. This represents the allure of addiction calling for ENA to go further to reach her manic self, Mooney. Now we're in an area with a stairway leading up to an eye, and also those rain rocks we saw from earlier. When ENA leaves this place, she will have to deal with those, the consequences of her manic episodes. But for now, she's going into an eye. Since ENA likely does her drugs in the bathroom, she is probably near a mirror. This eye represents the final moment of sanity as she stares at her reflection before going into a drug-filled manic state. She likely drinks heavily beforehand to keep herself from going too erratic while high and giving Mooney too much control. And now, ENA goes into a room with Mooney. Now, Mooney does not have the cubic object sticking out of her, likely because Mooney has been here since ENA entered military training and hasn't had very much control over ENA. Yet now, ENA has gone back to Mooney. And also in this room, there are other strange creatures that we've seen before. Again, these are the drug users. Another thing I want to mention here is that ENA's name throughout the series and the game is pronounced differently by pretty much everyone. Now, Joel G explained this as just everyone on the team making the show and the game pronouncing her name differently, but I think there's a further meaning. And I think that meaning is that whatever ENA's real name is is pronounced differently by a lot of people and frequently mispronounced, which means that whatever her name is can be easily mispronounced. Now, back to this room. Mooney says that
It looks like the fisherman became the fished. Am I right?
Now, what this likely means is when ENA was young, drugs normally found her. She likely just happened to have opportunities reveal themselves. However, in this situation, ENA actively went to search for narcotics and actively went to search for Mooney. Now, in this section, ENA acts drunk and strange. Again, like I said before, she likely drinks heavily beforehand to give Mooney less control, which is why Mooney is irritated when asking if ENA is drunk again.
Are you drunk again?
ENA also occasionally transforms into strange creatures while being drunk. This likely represents how ENA is likely rude and derisive when she's under the influence of alcohol. Now, in the end, it is revealed that ENA came to Mooney to give her a gift, and the gift turns out to be Mooney herself. Now, what this means is Mooney's control over ENA yet again, and now Mooney has been reunited with ENA, and that is where this episode ends, bringing us to the final episode I will discuss today, Temptation Stairway.
Это Турон?
Turron! Turron! Turron!
Now, the first thing we see in this section are mannequins. Now, mannequins are actually a pretty important part as they appear a lot throughout the rest of this episode and in the game. Now, what these represent are people who have died from their addictions. These people are those who have tried in vain to satisfy their physical selves and paid for it with their lives. Now, at the beginning of the episode, they seem to just stand around aimlessly. However, they change their behavior later on. Now, in this episode, ENA states that she wants to go home because she's allergic to people.
I want to go home. I'm allergic to people.
What this likely means is she's had bad experiences with people before who have criticized her for her addictions. ENA also states that she keeps hearing voices inside her head that tell her to eat her veggies.
I keep hearing voices inside my head. They tell me to eat my veggies.
Now, what this likely represents is the voice of her parents, whom she regrets disappointing and who disapprove of her actions currently. Now it's time to get to the main aspect of this episode, and that is the Great Runas. Or I should say, the Great Run As. You see, Run As is a prompt in command prompt that allows someone to log in and execute commands in a system as a different account. Now, this creates the opportunity for something I like to call simulation theory, and that everything here is a simulation inside ENA's head, and she was likely maybe kidnapped on the front lines of Ukraine and experimented on. Or maybe she was kidnapped somewhere else and Ukraine has nothing to do with this, and this is all just a simulation. I don't like that theory, because it's boring, and it's stupid. But it is a possibility, so there is that. However, as far as my dream theory is concerned, this could show us that ENA was primarily trained in the IT field for tactical operations in Ukraine. Now, ENA probably wanted to log in through a different account to gain access to substances she was using, so there was likely someone in ENA's unit who had access to some sort of system that could access the dark web to order narcotics online. And this is our primary goal for the episode. While in the show, ENA tries to make it to the Great Runas, in the real world, ENA tries to execute a command to order narcotics. Now, we can see a lot of the mannequins attempting to climb up, showing how many people attempt to satisfy themselves with narcotics and how they fail and end up ruining their lives in the process. Now, the mannequins actually trample Mooney here, and some of them actually form physical blocks to keep ENA from going on, likely to prevent her from feeding her addictions further. Yet ENA presses on regardless. Now, something random here that I felt the need to point out was a strange logo that ENA just vomits into existence. It's a reference to the company Toei Animation's original logo. Now, this company made famous anime cartoons such as the Dragon Ball series. I have no idea why it's here other than Joel wanted it to be because he liked the show or something. I am not going to look into this much further considering the actual original show this is referencing has like 1,000 episodes, and I know better than diving down pop culture rabbit holes. Ready or not. Anyways, moving on. ENA seems to have a significant mental breakdown, showing her more depressive episodes rather than her more manic episodes. We now discover a new character. A strange spinning frog trapped in a cinder block, whose movements are accompanied by explosions. Now, what this represents is the drill instructor from Defiant International. This instructor would have trained recruits, including ENA. He likely talked how they take in young, troubled men and women to save the youth and turn them into disciplined soldiers. He also kicks the lever-loving crap out of ENA to stop her mental breakdown.
To save the youth!
Which is likely how he managed to control ENA's manic episodes and depressive episodes while she was in training. ENA was likely also unhappy with being in military training and rebelled against the drill instructor, causing the drill instructor to discipline her further. The hard block the frog is in represents the toughness of the instructor. Frog is also the term for the webbing component that holds a bayonet to the scabbard, so therefore that means the drill instructor likely had a bayonet on his weapon. Also, ENA likely talked back to the drill instructor by asking why the instructor can't do the climbing exercises, which they likely had to do for their physical training. The instructor likely then wittily replied,
Climbing makes me itchy. Plus, it's fun to watch all the bodies falling.
Interestingly, the instructor seemed to know about ENA's plan for the Great Runas, or Run As command, and even wished her luck. However, it is not unlike military to encourage drug use, particularly that of amphetamines, to assist in combat. Now, ENA encounters a character on a unicycle who throws 3 masks in the air who form another character. This character offers ENA treats, and then gives ENA a turron. Now, I spent so many hours and a lot more time than I care to admit trying to figure out what turron meant for the lore. Took me so long, but I finally figured it out, and I will explain it later. Turron is an ancient Greek dish that is served around certain holidays, but is also just, an ancient Greek pastry. And it's an ancient tradition for certain street vendors to exchange turron. ENA likely found one of these vendors in Peru before or in between deployment. This dessert quickly became ENA's favorite food. The turron dance that ENA does, and the characters do after receiving the turron, is a reference to the music video Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads. Now, this has to do with ENA's strange head bobbing we saw in Auction Day, because that is also part of the music video. You see, that song is about how you have a nice house, a nice car, and a beautiful wife, but you weren't necessarily aiming for those things specifically. You just ended up with those things. The song explains how you live most of your life somewhat subconsciously by going through the daily motions almost outside of your control. This represents how ENA is subconsciously living her life because her bipolar self is controlling her, leaving her to experience her life almost in the third person. Also, the boy on the unicycle represents one of the peddlers for the mobile pastry shops. Now, what happens next is ENA fails to make it to the Great Runas in time, and it is absorbed into a small girl. The little girl likely represents the last of ENA's innocence that she is sacrificing to fuel her addictions. Now, ENA ends up in a room with lots of doors. These doors likely represent the many computer systems ENA has access to. She needs to choose the correct one to use the Run As code correctly. Now, ENA enters a strange code room, and you see golden spoons? Well, these aren't spoons, these are the crying eyes of the Great Runas. And now, it is time for my least favorite character in this entire thing. A genie guy whose name is Ulysses. This is a reference to a book by James Joyce, because he has 3 personalities while talking to ENA. And the book by James Joyce changes writing styles every chapter. Now, this reference actually throws us off the path of discovering the truth behind ENA. James Joyce's book, as stated by the creator, James Joyce, does not have an integral moral or purpose. Joyce said, they, the public, may take it, the book, in some more serious way, and on honor of the gentleman, there is not one single serious line in it. This was a humorous recreation of Homer's work, Odysseus. This is Joel Gaera trying to dissuade us into thinking that ENA is a purely artistic work that doesn't mean anything. Do not listen. In reality, Ulysses is probably the system administrator. He likely knew about ENA's drug use but did not care. He, however, did warn ENA against it, saying she would fail like everyone else, hence the mannequins, who tried to satisfy themselves with the substances. Ulysses is also flashing images of the infamous image of the Inferno, a depiction of hell, from Dante's The Inferno, a poem about hell. This represents how ENA will surely burn in hell if she continues. He also says that desires are never fulfilled.
But heed this warning.
Warning!
Desires are never fulfilled.
Nor quenched.
You will fail.
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 Fail. Fail.
Like the rest of them.
Like the rest of them.
Like the rest of them.
This is a very important moral for this entire series. Now Ulysses instructs that to get to the Great Runas, ENA must go through the Holy Code. This is a computer system that ENA tampered with to execute the run as command. Now moving on to the next area, there are hourglasses around. This represents the loading time for the run as command. This area acts as a gateway between entering the system and not. Next, ENA enters a strange room. The room is inside some glass figure crying up to the sky, which represents the point of no return. Now, the flowers on the ground actually represent what I was saying before about Molly. Here we have green, yellow, and red flowers. These, of course, being the flag of Molly. There are some other flowers off in the distance, but those are less prominently shown than the ones right in front of us. This isn't super important to the lore because it only explains ENA's parentage, but it is interesting to know. And there's a tank spinning in the center which represents the memories of war corrupting ENA's childhood memories of her mother. That is also why the flowers are smiling. It's her childhood memories, fond ones. Now we encounter a new character, who is actually Russian. Now this appears to be a cat-like character, which is referencing a painting of Picasso's cat El Gato. Now this character is a shepherd, who tries to keep ENA from reaching the Great Runas. Now this represents a shepherd that ENA likely encountered on deployment. The tank represents the Russian military, and the red ripe on the shepherd represents the Russian flag. Shepherd likely found ENA's unit and confronted ENA. ENA was worried that the shepherd would alert Russian soldiers to their presence, yet ENA did not want to kill the shepherd. That's when ENA gave the shepherd a turon. And the shepherd liked it so much that she agreed to let ENA go and take it in exchange for silence. The shepherd also says, when ENA first discovers her, another ENA troublemaker, likely referring to the fact that this shepherd has encountered multiple PMCs from Yanakive. After this, the shepherd lets ENA go and gives her a blood ID. This likely is a means for ENA and her unit to operate in the region undetected. Maybe something that can hack into Russian computer systems and tamper with drones. It is also integral for ENA to obtain the drugs and use in the run-as system to access the internet. Now we're in another room with more doors, with also what appear to be some dead ENAs. Now these are the same as the mannequins. These are people who have died of their addictions, and they represent how everyone with addictions is two-faced. One face being the mask they hide behind, and the other being their true self. And now ENA has successfully tapped into the internet. Now ENA enters a strange white abyss place. Now, after she gains access to the system, the mannequins that are around represent the other addicted people who have used this system to seek their narcotics. There is a large square right at the entrance of the room that has a data matrix code that says to forget your past. This is inspiring ENA to forget her past issues with drug use and the efforts she took to get clean, and instead relapse and start using again. Now, ENA then approaches a banana, and then these two very interesting characters appear. I have some explaining to do about this. Now, all of this represents the drug organization Pink Grenade, known especially for their dealing in hallucinogenic substances. The man represents the website itself, and the head on the plate represents the strict security protocols for the site that ENA must navigate. Now, ENA says to the head that you are all living a lie.
You're all living a lie!
After the head prevents ENA from using the blood ID. "You are all living a lie" is likely a code that ENA needed to submit for approval. Now the banana represents the drug delivery, and the man says, "Drink the blood and smoke the banana." This is likely not exactly what was said in real life. However, this was likely instructions on the website that specified how to ingest the drugs. Now ENA enters a room with cat doors. Now, cats represent nicknames. K, Kit Kat, and Cat Valium are all other names for ketamine, likely the drugs that ENA had purchased. And now ENA enters the final area, a desert. After ENA accesses the system and makes the purchase, she needs to retrieve the drugs themselves. She then goes to where she was instructed to by the dealer. The desert symbolizes the flat plains of Ukraine and the uncertainty that ENA faces when thinking about going through with the purchase. Now ENA then encounters an ophonym, which is a type of angel, and then a character comes out of it named Findal, who is a pink dolphin. Now this is the dealer's bodyguard that ensures the dealer is protected. The ophonym represents the never-ending protection the mysterious dealer has from the cartel. Dolphins are also notorious tricksters that can get away with almost anything. You know the shark in Jaws? That was a dolphin, but that's a story for another time. Findal fake challenges ENA to fight to see if she is a threat to the dealer. ENA declines, and Findal lets ENA go to the dealer. Now ENA sees a green orb. Now this is literally just an Eye of Ender, but in real life, the green orb represents a locator beacon to guide ENA to the trade. And the strange cracked balls you see lying on the ground, they symbolize small cellophane balls drugs are usually kept in. Now the fountain that ENA goes to represents the trade deal itself. Now a strange floating witch thing floats up out of the fountain. This is the drug dealer. ENA pays with her blood money she obtained from wartime operations with PMC contracts, hence why the water turns to blood. And the witch-like look represents the 6 spells of addictions that drugs can give. The floating eye things represent the all-seeing cartel leaders, representing that this dealer is high-ranking. Now what happens next? Well, the fog clears, and this represents the uncertainty clearing away from ENA. The floating orange balls are the acquired drugs, and the giant statue is the continuous watching eyes of the cartel ENA has just dealt with. This is not the last we will be seeing of this cartel. Now ENA goes to an upside-down pyramid with a door that is now open. The upside-down pyramid represents the reverse hierarchy in a story. The climax of ENA's story in the show has happened, and we are nearing the end. The corridor itself represents the somewhat perilous journey back to her camp. It is still a war zone after all. However, she eventually arrives, representing the waterfall. And the waterfall is the act of taking drugs as she's fallen down a long and disorienting drop. And this drop leads her to the Great Runas, and then to Mooney. Now, one thing you may be asking is if she's using her drugs now, and being introduced to Mooney, and this was apparently the first time she did drugs in Ukraine, well then why is the last time we've seen Mooney in Extinction Party the first time seeing Mooney? I theorize that while this deal was just for a small delivery of drugs, the actual place ENA went to in Extinction Party was a drug den that ENA probably used a lot over in Ukraine, and also probably where she got to know the cartel more and where she truly re-engaged with her manic self. Also, this brings me to talk about the different things that stick out of Mooney. For instance, here at the end, she has a shepherd's staff, which represents how she's shepherding ENA to do her bidding. And also, in the beginning of the episode, we saw that she had a leg, which represents the physical control Mooney has over ENA. Now, being at the Great Runas signifies ENA finally relapsing on her drugs and fulfilling her physical desires. Now, the sad lit-up Great Runas door, that is different from all the other ones, shows someone who managed to stop themselves from going through with the deal. Now, all the other doors, however, are people who ended up going through with the deal. Now, how does it end? ENA meets with Mooney, and ENA's face changes gradually as they're talking to a complete yellow. This means that the real version of ENA is completely covered by the happy, fake version of herself. Mooney also changes into a strange figure. This version is the black and white ENA we have seen before in the show. This version of ENA is the broken version of her, a twisted shell of a person only driven by physical desires, corrupted by her illnesses. As we stand now, this is who ENA is, but that is not the end of the story. However, that will have to be covered in part 2. I thank you all for watching, and I hope that you will stay tuned for the next part as we discuss ENA's Dream Barbecue. You can expect that to come out sometime next week. Now, if you think that my theory is invalid and that all the points I made are absolutely absurd, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, who really knows? Leave a comment regardless. And that is exactly what the third part of this series is for, is about your comments. So whatever you say, I will make sure that I cover. If you think I missed anything or didn't cover something in enough detail, let me know, and I'll come back to it. But without further ado, thank you ladies and gentlemen so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. So long.